Hi, everybody. This is Doug Cha, the Executive Director of the Governance Center at the Conference Board. And thank you for joining us for this special edition of Governance Watch. We are here with Steven Clifford to talk about his book called The CEO Pay Machine, How It Trashes America and How to Stop It. And so Steven is the former CEO of King Broadcasting Company and has been a member of 13 boards of directors, including chair of the Comp Committee. And so, Steven, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show with us.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about your career background.
Career background. I did my undergraduate at Columbia as an art history major, and that qualified me for entry-level position in the janitorial profession. So I then went back and took an MBA at Harvard, and I went into government for a while. The most fun I've ever had at a job was I was deputy controller of the city of New York during the financial crisis in '74 to '77. Then I moved to Seattle to become CFO at King Broadcasting. I later became CEO there. That company got sold in 1992, and I did a buyout on one of the divisions with a private equity partner. We sold that 7 years later, and I retired. And retirement's the only thing I've done well in my life, I would say.
Well, speaking modestly, of course. And then so at some point you decided to write this book, The CEO Pay Machine. And, you know, I think what attracts people to this book is that it is written by a former CEO and someone who has been in many boardrooms and comp committees and had to deliberate over pay of all kinds of CEOs. So tell us what prompted you to write this book, because there's not that many like this.
You know, when I was thinking of retirement, I wanted to keep a hand in somewhat. So I wangled my way on a number of boards. A couple of these asked me to chair the Comp Committee. Now that's not much of an honor, because in America it's well known that the second dumbest director chairs audit, because they reserve the dumbest to chair comp. So these weren't Fortune 500 companies like I write about in my book, but they use the exact same consultants and the same pay system that the Fortune 500 companies used. And as I started to look at this, I said to myself, this is crazy. I mean, this makes no sense at all. It didn't bother me that it overpaid the CEO. That was a small part of it. I mean, it did overpay the CEO, but that was a small part of the problem. It seemed to me it focused the CEO on the wrong things. Quite naturally, it focused him on what would earn him a bonus. I'll use the male pronoun here. 95% of the CEOs I'm talking about are male,
Sure.
rather than awkwardly switch between he and she. So, in looking at what would earn him a bonus, it very much limited the CEO's curiosity, creativity, innovation, and even the pleasure of a job well done. And those are the things I've found that make people perform at their best. So I didn't think it was making the CEO perform at his best. And I thought it wasted a lot of money. Beyond what it wasted in CEO pay, the effect on morale was very bad. And the most costly is the short-term nature of the CEO's decisions, because he is looking at some year-end metric that will earn him a bonus. It almost compels a very short-term view. So to try and convince my fellow board members to jettison the system and fire these consultants, I began to do some research and then decided to write a book about it.
Got it. And so the CEO Pay Machine, the title.
Yes.
Explain a little bit about what this machine is and looks like.
In fact, it is a machine that was constructed by pay consultants in the 80s or so. And as I hope to talk about later, companies rarely bid for another company's CEO. So there's no market there. There's no market to look at. Previously to the consultants, CEOs had always been paid on the basis of internal equity. That, a general gets so much and a colonel gets so much and a captain gets so much. The consultants came in and they had a useful sales tool saying, we know what other CEOs are paid, and they convinced companies that they should be paid as other CEOs were paid. So the first step in this process is to assemble a peer group. This is supposedly a peer group of other companies and what their CEOs are paid. Now, you won't be surprised to learn that companies stack their own peer group with highly paid CEOs. I mean, it's been proven time and time again with studies. The second step is to say where your company belongs in that peer group. Now, the idea here is that, well, if you're a high-performing company, you should pay better than a mediocre performing company. So the company ranks itself, and surprise, surprise, everybody's above average. All CEOs work in Lake Wobegon. Every company I've been on the board of, every company I've researched, rates its CEO either at the 50th, 75th, or 90th percentile. Third step, that only sets a target. If let's say your average CEO in this group is making 20 million, you're ranked at the 75th percentile, you're at 30 million, but that's a target. Now comes in the pay for performance. This is the bedrock of this whole system. We're going to pay for performance. So the CEO has certain bonus metrics, and if he surpasses those, he can make 2-3 times what his target was. Now, in my experience, CEO surpasses these goals 80% of the time. I mean, not surprisingly, CEO's in a pretty good position here. He has all the information. He controls the information and financial system. The board that's setting these parameters with him has no staff, no institutional memory. So let's say he beats his system. He beats his goals. He gets easy goals. He beats them, and he makes 60 million, double his target. Now here's the key. Here's the beauty of the machine. That 60 million then gets fed back into the peer groups of all his other peers. Next year they get a raise just because he got a big raise, and then the year after that, he gets a big raise because they got a big raise because he got a big raise. So what you've got is this game of CEO leapfrog. And CEO leapfrog has driven CEO pay since 1980, 1,000% increase. That's in real inflation-adjusted dollars, 1,000%. By the way, the pay for the average male worker has declined over that period. And so now we have CEO pay ratio, which we're disclosing this year, and it's 312 to 1 at the S&P 500. In Japan today, it's 16. In Denmark, it's 48. And in the most respected institution in this country, the U.S. military, it's less than 5. So you don't need 316, apparently, to have an organization that works well.
Sure. And so, but you're talking about there's certain metrics, right?
Yes.
That the short-term and long-term bonuses get pinned to.
Right.
But the board sets those metrics.
Yes.
But I guess, the theory is that those are the metrics that the investors care about the most. So why wouldn't you incentivize the CEO to hit those targets?
Well, first of all, the investors care about total return, however you get there. Once you start bonusing a different metric than total return, you have misaligned interest. You could say, well, margin's a part of total return. I'm a financial guy. Tell me a margin, I can hit it. Other things may go to hell, but I'll hit that margin. All of these parts, and by the way, things like revenue growth and whatnot, are all of those metrics are roughly in the 50-60% correlated with total return. I say forget about all of those. Just long-term total return That's the only metric you want. Anything else, any other thing is either conflicts with it or is superfluous. So let's say I get a bonus for growing EBITDA. Well, I can grow EBITDA in any number of ways. I can do a bunch of capital spending, and that'll increase EBITDA terrifically. So if EBITDA were totally correlated with shareholder return, which it isn't, it's superfluous to give me one for EBITDA. It turns out it's uncorrelated, and it would make me do many short-term things that would not make a lot of sense for the long term.
Yeah, so you say in your book, specific pay for performance bonuses will always create perverse incentives in a short-term orientation. Describe, how that happens.
Okay, let me give you a case. Short-term bonuses today. Let's say it's based on stock price. Okay, now there are two ways to get a high stock price. First way is to actually beat the competition, make better products, innovate more, control costs, make them cheaper, market better, so beat the competition. That's the tough way. The easy way is buy back your own stock. So if I'm getting a bonus for getting a high stock price, and if at the same time 85% of my compensation is coming in equity, I've got a tremendous incentive to keep my stock price high. So corporate America this year will spend, I think, $1.2 trillion buying back its own stock. By the way, they're buying back its own stock when it's at all-time highs,
yeah,
which is absolutely contrary to finance theory.
Yeah.
Finance theory says you buy back your own stock when it's at or below its intrinsic price. They're in the business now of buying high and presumably selling low if they ever sell again.
Yeah, just like the mistake every retail investor makes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But they're doing this with $1 trillion. They over the past 10 years, stock buybacks have been roughly 50% of net earnings, and they're paying out another 30-40% of net earnings in dividends, reinvesting very little. So we're competing internationally, globally, with the Chinese, who are investing huge amounts of money in the industries of the future, in artificial intelligence and things like that, and we're buying back our own stock. I mean, economically, it doesn't make any sense.
But if the shareholders love it, then what's the problem at that point?
Well, the problem is you've created something that's a short-term high. Everybody loves it because they all get rich in a short time, but you're eating the seed corn. And seed corn may be very tasty, but come next planting season, you'd find you don't have any, or at least nothing to compete with other countries that are not going into this insane repurchasing, in a sense, eating their own equity.
Sure. So, this gets into the more societal discussion. You say colossal CEO pay harms American industry, curbs economic growth, and undermines democracy. But, how is it really fair to pin part of the blame on CEOs for income inequality in this country?
I think so. And the reason I think so is that, as you know, income inequality has risen greatly since 1980. Now, there are many explanations as to why. There's globalization, there's lack of union power, there is changes in technology, the changes in corporate culture and the shareholder value school. And all of that plus more has undoubtedly contributed to it. But if you look at the proximate cause is very simple. A small amount of people made a huge amount of money. And so if you look at the 0.1%, who averaged last year about $7 million apiece, Their share of income has quadrupled since 1980. They have taken roughly 40% of all economic gains. This is 1/10 of 1%, 40% of all economic gains. Now, when you look at who these people are, they turn out not to be basketball players and movie stars. They turn out to be business executives. 70% or so are business executives. Many of those business executive compensation is highly influenced by CEO pay. If CEOs are making so much, then I got to make so much. Also, I don't have time to go deeply into it, but in the book I write about how the rise in income inequality has impeded economic growth in this country. And there are a number of reasons for it. The major reason is it restricts the opportunity for the potentially your largest asset, which is an educated, motivated, and competent workforce. It also imposes extra costs in healthcare, crime, incarceration, and most important, it erodes trust. I mean, trust is probably more important for an economy to function than a legal system.
And trust in business and
Capitalism.
capitalism.
Trust in business and capitalism,
Yep.
and you can see that right now with. There have been recent surveys among millennials that 50% of them don't like capitalism. Now, I don't think they know what they're talking about. I happen to think that, myself, I think a free market system with a light regulatory touch and a truly free market system is by far the best way, best economic system in the country. And it worries me that people are looking at it and saying this system's corrupt.
Yeah, and now we have politicians who are
Yeah.
self-proclaimed socialists who
That's
are
right.
either winning or doing quite well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm afraid you have a Democratic left, and I'm Democrat, but you have a Democratic left that's not making a hell of a lot of economic sense to me.
Okay. So obviously we talked about a lot here in terms of how this affects companies, the role individuals play, and then the societal impact. So what's the solution? You talk a little bit about this in the book.
My solution is a very simple one. Give the CEO a salary and restricted stock, tie up that restricted stock for even a while after he leaves or retires. Nothing else. No annual bonuses for hitting earnings per share or getting sales increases or whatnot. He is then a long-term shareholder. He's completely aligned with the people. I would have one performance target only, and that is total shareholder return over his entire tenure. And you could either have this, that he'd have to beat an index of S&P 500, or that he'd have to beat an absolute number. I mean, I think those sort of things are. But one performance criteria, and then if he misses, he forfeits a whole lot of the stock. Again,
What if someone very early on in their
Yeah.
tenure seems to be underperforming, and they say, "Hey, wait, be patient. I'll get you there
Yeah.
in 5-10 years." Then then what do you do?
you fire him.
Okay.
That's the board's job, to fire somebody who's underperforming, and not to listen to, "Hey, I've got a great plan." I mean, if they set out the plan initially and say, "Look, we're on a hockey stick here, and this is my plan, and stay with me," and you agree to it, that's one thing. If they're just underperforming, they got fired.
Got it. And so, you talk a little bit about, or you talk a lot about some of the delusions out there,
Yes.
false foundations. You talked, about the market
Yes.
for talent. And so, but I mean, isn't it, if you have a very successful CEO, doesn't it make sense that they'll get picked off or poached by a larger competitor or
Well, it doesn't happen. CEOs rarely gets poached because they're not like LeBron James, who would improve any basketball team he goes to, or Meryl Streep, who would improve any movie she goes to. Most CEOs would not improve another company. That's because their competence rests largely on a very detailed knowledge and understanding of a single industry and a single company. So that single company, its culture, its history, its finances, its board, its distribution system, its supply chain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That knowledge and how to maneuver within those parameters is of relatively little use outside that company. And directors understand this. That's why 75% of all CEO appointees at this S&P 500 level are internal. And they've worked for the company an average of 17 years before they get the job. They know a lot about the company. So because directors understand this, they don't poach others. Less than 2% of all of these CEOs were previously the CEO of another public company. Jumps between these companies of CEOs happens about once a year. And when it happens, they usually fail. An external CEO hire is twice as likely to be fired as an internal. So there is no market for these people. And what you've created is, since you don't have a market, you've created this system that the pay consultant says, well, it looks a little like a market. It has some aspects that look a little like a market, but what it does is it just annually ratchets up CEO pay. The second, I think, really problematic foundation of this is the idea that this is a great motivational tool.
This meaning kind of the existing tools of long-term comp.
Long-term, short-term bonuses,
Yeah.
et cetera, are that the boards will tell you, well, we need to incentivize the CEO. That means that the CEO is going to act differently because of these. It doesn't make any sense to give him a bonus to do exactly what he would have done without a bonus. So, as I say, when you do this, it does focus the CEO tightly on what makes him a bonus. In that case, in that sense, it works. But as I talked about before, it very much restricts him to what will earn him a bonus. And any kind of creative, innovative, etc., it's very, very hard to pursue when you're worried about, I want certain earnings per share that'll make me a bonus. And this has been studied time and time again. The power of financial incentives, and it's been in any number of tests. It's shown that apart from routine, repetitive tasks, financial incentives actually interfere with performance because they interfere with what people do best, and that's a job well done. I mean, you think about it. When have you done your best work? Have you done your best work because you had a great new creative idea and wanted to follow it out? Or were you saying, I can make some money personally off this? It's never I can make money.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, for example, this webcast, if I got paid 3 times as much in salary, would this webcast be 3 times as good?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd probably put just as much effort into it as I do now.
Exactly. And so, this, in a sense, it's demeaning to say that these people will only do their job if you give them a huge amount of money. And and of course, it doesn't end up with any kind of pay for performance. Corporations don't know how to pay for performance. So they use these half measures, which I say sometimes are good or some. The shareholders want one thing. Why do you have 17? Why are you bonusing 17 things when the shareholders want one thing? It's very easy to set up a system that says you get, and we're not even talking about how much money you're going to make, but whatever you make, you just get salary and restricted stock.
So if the CEOs all know this, then is it just greed that's driving all of this, at least in the United States? Because it seems like a uniquely American phenomenon.
I think what has happened is the pay consultants are the ones that initially drove it. And they got in, and then the CEOs saw that having pay consultants was good for them. The boards had somebody to hide behind with the pay consultants. And now you have something that's out of control. And if you're a CEO, why should you turn it down? I mean, all my buddies are making $40 million a year. Hell, I might as well make $40 million a year. I don't think it's pure greed, because I think it's more that these are ambitious people. And you throw a piece of meat on the table, and they're going to jump at it. That's what they do. So I don't think it's greed. I think they would be just as happy making 10% of what they're making today if everybody else made 10% of what they. I don't think they're any happier than the CEOs were in the 1970s or 1950s when they were making a fraction of what these CEOs make.
Yeah, someone told me that CEOs are very competitive people.
Absolutely.
And the way they keep score is the compensation in terms of just dollars.
Yes, which is. I think I have Calvin Trillin, who was one of my favorite humorists. He wrote that the fact that they had spent their entire lives making more money than anybody could possibly use shows they don't do it out of greed, but they do it because they don't know any better. Which I think was a marvelous comment.
Very possibly so. Yeah. And so you talked about the role of comp consultants,
yes.
And I think a lot of people point to that
yes.
as one of the
yes.
maybe not driving forces, but at least contributing factors. Now, but there are other players in this.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the institutional asset owners and management. What about these large index fund families
yes.
that they own chunks of the company?
Absolutely.
And they could call up and say, "Hey, we don't like how this is going."
I've been trying to talk to a number of these large managers. I find at some of them, the governance people are very sympathetic, but if they are an active manager, they have a problem being public about it, because their analysts are constantly calling the companies. And so, to the extent that they vote against a company in a say on pay, they know that their analysts may not be treated as well as the next guy. I think the ones who should be leading this are the BlackRocks and the Vanguards. Because they, first of all, they are a store of permanent capital to these companies. And they should be the ones that should be most concerned about the short-term nature of what happens here. I haven't been able to get through to anybody, so if anybody from Vanguard or BlackRock or anybody who's having an index funds, please give me a call.
And so, but to that point, and also to what we talked about earlier, the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink,
yes.
famously came out with a letter a couple months ago called, Sense of Purpose.
Yes.
And talked about this.
Yes.
Created quite a stir,
yes.
Good and bad. And so,
yes.
what was your take on Larry's message?
Well, I agree with it completely. I'd like to see BlackRock make a little more noise in its say on pay votes than it has. On the say on pay votes, this system is a rigged, corrupt system. And what the say on pay votes do, and what the shareholder advisory people do, is pick out the 4% most egregious cases. The fact is, you should be, the say on pay vote is your chance to say this whole system is no good, it's rigged. You people have to get a new system. And that's what I'm preaching. I don't have much of a choir yet, but I think the system is so outrageous and corrupt that no scam like this is going to last forever.
But so you mentioned the proxy advisory firms,
yeah.
ISS and Glass Lewis being
yes.
the most prominent ones. So the criticism of them is, who are they to tell us how to structure comp? What do these people know?
Right,
they're telling us what the burn rate should be for our
right.
stock option plan.
Right.
So what's the role that these folks could play in the solution?
I would say that they should be the ones that start to, that rather than making this thing more complicated and introducing more and new variables to look at, they should be the ones who take the lead and say, look, there's a simple way to do this, and there's a simple way to get there. I'm reminded of, let me take up, when Ptolemy had his system.
Before my time, yeah.
Before your time, okay. I was there. But, as observations got better and better, they had to make the system more and more complicated. So, to explain the retrograde motion of the planets as viewed from the Earth, they had this idea that the planets were all circling the Earth, that they were epicycles, and that the planets, as they rotated, also rotated in epicycles around the rotation, and that explained the retrograde motion. As observations got better, they had to put epicycles on epicycles. Then as they got better, they had to have deference. Then they had to have eccentrics. And finally, the mathematics of the Ptolemaic system got impossibly complex because it was founded on false premises. And that's what we have here. We have a system that's founded on false premises. We're constantly tweaking it to try and make it, we observe that, hey, it doesn't do this, hey, it doesn't do this, hey, it doesn't do this, and try and tweak it and make it better. And nobody's saying, throw out the system, it's lousy. And it works for only three people, for three groups. It works for the CEOs, it works for the board, and it works for the compensation consultants. Now, those are the only people it works for. Harms everybody else. But those are the only people in on the decision making right now.
And so so the investors, aren't having much of an impact, or they're kind of letting this happen. Proxy advisory firms we talked about. Right. What about lawmakers and regulators? Are there any role for Congress or someone who can kind of dictate things to come in?
This is wonderful. In my book, I said there should be an excise tax on CEO pay above a certain level. Well, this got very little publicity, but in the tax bill, the Jobs and Tax Act,
sure,
that was passed by the Republicans in the last Congress, they did address CEO pay with an excise tax. They put an excise tax of 21% on all CEO pay over $1 million at nonprofits.
Interesting.
So they address the real problem. The real problem's not with the for-profit sector. The real problem's at universities and foundations and whatnot, and maybe
the conference board. Yeah,
the conference board. So they have they do have the excise tax, and so I've been trying to interest legislators in just extending this tax to for-profit. I will say I've gotten zero interest from them. They just don't see this as an issue that's going to go anywhere.
Sure. So they go where the votes are, and they've got all kinds of
they got
interests.
They do not see this as any, or at least I have not met one who says, hey, that's a sexy issue, I'm going to grab hold of this.
Yeah.
Of course, all of them get money from CEOs too. So.
Sure. Yeah. Campaign contributions. Yeah. What about, so board members obviously are people who are closer and have some control over this,
yes.
At least, how things are designed. Do we have the right people on boards and in the comp committee rooms to do their job the right way?
No. Right now, I'm not sure it's so much of the people as the incentives. There is no incentive for a board member to take up this topic for any number of reasons. One, the CEO is your friend generally. He's the captain of the team. He may have invited you on the board. You will not be invited to join many more boards if you're known as a guy who gets riled up about CEO pay. And there is no gain for you personally, even if you triumph, even where you're successful in introducing a new system. Nobody would say, or look at us. So nobody. You can't come out and say, we successfully resisted our CEO's request for $25 million more this year. So right now, there's simply no incentive for the board members to attack that. And remember, a board is a very collegial place, and so whatever the comp committee decides, the 3-person comp committee, that will always get through. Warren Buffett said that he has often voted for packages coming from comp committee which he disagreed with, but why upset the comp committee?
Like you said, there's nothing to gain.
There's nothing to gain, and that's right.
And so, you were on a number of boards,
yes.
13, either on or chair of the comp committee a number of times. And so, and then, in your book, you talk about how you tried to implement your
yes.
proposed solution, or at least suggest it. And so tell us about that experience. What was the dynamic like at that point?
The dynamic was that was a private company. As I was working on, we had this usual system, and as a matter of fact, at that time, 2/3 of his bonus was on financial metrics, and 1/3 of his bonus was on, management accomplishments and whatnot. So I watched the first year as people sat down around the table and say, okay, what are we going to put for management accomplishments this year? And they'd say, well, how about this? Well, how about that? Oh, well, maybe this, And I said, this is lunacy. And I went to the chair of the committee, who was a dean of a very well-known business school. And I gave him all the reasons that I said we should, that the system was no good. And he said, I kind of agree with that. So once I got that, then I knew I could get the comp committee along. So then I knew it was just a matter of preparing the board. And since the comp committee was going for it, the board, and it sounded good to the board, and I could give all the selling points to the board and show that no matter, in good years he got a big bonus, and in bad years he got a big bonus, that this system was no good. So it did work there. We got the system in that I asked for, that he gets a restricted stock, and if he doesn't he's got to hit a certain bogey by his tenure. If he doesn't, he loses a whole lot of the restricted stock. And that's got him focused, as you might think, very closely on a long-term plan for a long-term return.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have today.
Okay.
But I really appreciate you coming in, Steven, and I think that for everyone out there, I think you should read the book and kind of look at the more in-depth discussion that Steven Clifford gives on the CEO pay machine. And there are a lot of familiar messages in here. But this time it's a former CEO saying that,
okay.
Which we don't see very often. So thank you for sharing some time with us to talk about your book. And
thank you for having me. It's been a very good interview, and I appreciate it.
Great. So that's it for this episode of Governance Watch, special book webcast with Steven Clifford, the author of The CEO Pay Machine. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.